So look in your Bibles, turn over into Genesis, and just get there around in the chapter 32 area. We've been looking at Jacob as one of the more misunderstood people. You know, we think we know his story, we think we know it so well that it even affects his translations and things like that. And I took out a lot of stuff, just so you know, so you're not going to have to sit through review for those of you who have had it. I took out a lot of the setup, but I left a couple things in here, and I'm glad that I did, so we can just see a couple of things, if it'll keep going. But Genesis chapter 17, when we take a look at Abram, says that he was 99 years old when Adonai appeared to Abram. He said to him, I am El Shaddai, God Almighty. Continually walk before me and be blameless. You will be blameless. That's the call. That's the call, expectation that he has for us, to be blameless before him. And that word we looked at was tamayim, which is to be complete, whole, entire, sound, unimpaired, innocent, having integrity. What is complete or entirely in accord with truth and fact. And that's a word that in most contexts, when you see this variations of the tamayim and such, it's always translated in a positive sense of integrity, of blamelessness and things like that. But then it's in every context that's true except for one. And it's this one that we started out with looking at Jacob. It says, when the boys grew up, Esau became a man knowledgeable in hunting, an outdoorsman, while Jacob was a mild man remaining at home, in the tents. And we went in depth about what that really means, that he wasn't just a mama's boy who stayed at home. But that word for quiet man is related to the same one that's there for Abram. It's tam, which means perfect, complete, whole, one who lacks nothing, wholesome, all those other types of things, and complete or morally innocent, having integrity, one who is morally or ethically pure. And because we think we know Jacob, because we think we know his story, then we look at that and say, well, that can't be right, because that's totally not Jacob as we know him. And so we find that one variation which says an ordinary or quiet sort of person. And that's only used like that in connection with him. And what we end up doing, what we find out that we're doing, is we're taking Esau's word for who Jacob is. And so Esau says this about him in chapter 25. It says, verse 20, chapter 27. Esau said, is this why he was named Jacob? Isn't he rightly named Jacob, since he has tricked me twice already? My birthright he has taken. Look, now he has taken my blessing. Right? And this is some 60, 70 years later that he is still holding on to this grudge, holding on to this wrong, this root of bitterness that takes up in him. We take Esau's word for it when, as we were looking at it more extensively, Esau is not somebody you should trust. He is a dangerous person. He has a character much more, when he's talked about as a hunter and an outdoorsman, that's much more like Nimrod and such. He has that kind of character. Hebrews talks about him as being godless. So he is immoral and godless like Esau. But instead we look at the promise. He says that 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from your body will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. God's plan, even before they were born, was that Jacob was a better sort of person, a better character of person than Esau. And as we were studying out extensively, the rest of this story really does play that out and establish Jacob with this kind of integrity. When we get to chapter 28, after the period of Jacob dressing up as a brother, going in and receiving the blessing, you'd think that there would be some kind of rebuke for Jacob from Isaac, and there's not. There's not a rebuke for Isaac. There's not a rebuke for Rebekah. There's not a rebuke from God to either of them. And so just before he gets sent off to go look for a bride because Esau's anger is so hot that he wants to kill him, Isaac then turns and blesses Jacob, knowing full well who he is, knowing full well that this is my son Jacob, because he had withheld the most important part of the blessing that was still left. And he says, may God Almighty, may El Shaddai bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you so that you will become an assembly of peoples, and may he give you the blessing of Abraham to you and to your seed with you, that you may take possession of the land of your sojourn, which God gave to Abraham. That is Isaac blessing Jacob. Without any pretense, without any costume, without anything else. And we established some things in looking at the Torah portion last week in chapter 28, 29, and 30, coming up to where he leaves Laban and such at the 31. And we established his knowledge and work ethic in chapter 29. We established his integrity in chapter 31, verse 36, if you want to look at that. Jacob gets upset at the accusations that he's probably been hearing all his life. And he says, what is my crime? What is my sin that you hotly pursued me? For you have felt through all of my things. What did you find? Any of your household things? Put them here in front of my relatives and yours, so they can decide between the two of us. In other words, he's trying to establish his integrity. He hasn't robbed or cheated from Laban. He says, these past 20 years I've been with you. Your ewes and female goats have never miscarried. I've never eaten the rams of your flock. I didn't bring you animals torn by wild beasts. I myself would bear the loss. You would require it from my hand, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. I was consumed by heat during the day, consumed by frost during the night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. This is how it's been for me 20 years in your house. All right? So he establishes his integrity. Do I have that one in here? Okay. Jacob grew exceedingly prosperous, even in the midst of all of that. Chapter 30, verse 43 describes that blessing. It says, the man grew exceedingly prosperous, had numerous flocks, along with female and male servants, camels and donkeys. And Jacob even recognizes God's hand as the source of it all. In chapter 31, verse 5, he puts it like this. He says, the God of my father has been with me. Now you yourselves know that I have served your father with all my strength, that your father has fooled around with me and changed my salary 10 times, but God has not allowed him to harm me. Jacob's faith and trust in God is strong. That was the one I was looking for. We compared Jacob's behavior and activity as the shepherd of Laban's flocks, with the implication is that Laban's sons were exactly the opposite. So whereas Jacob, the females didn't miscarry, where for Laban and this is how Laban loses everything. Laban's sons, they did miscarry, they did eat the rams, they did allow predators to come. That Laban would bear the loss, that they wouldn't work day or night or in bad weather, and they would sleep all the time. We talked about that as establishing Jacob and who he is. He developed a good relationship with God during this time, an understanding with him. God is with Jacob as he was back in chapter 28. He's going to watch over Jacob. He's going to bring Jacob back. He's not going to forsake Jacob without fulfilling the promise. And then we see God, he calls him back to the promised land in chapter 31. Verse 3, he says, then Adonai said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. We get to the end of chapter 31. It says, Jacob also made an oath by the fear of his father Isaac. Then Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain, and he invited his relatives to eat bread. So they ate bread and spent the night there. Early in the morning, Laban got up, kissed his grandchildren and daughters, and blessed them. Then Laban leaves, and he left, and he returned to his place. While Jacob left on his way. And you ask the question, who is it that was there to welcome Jacob home to the promised land? You see that in the very next statement. While Jacob left on his way, the angels of God met him. Then Jacob said when he saw them, "This is God's camp." And he named that place Menahem.
Where's that at?
That's the end of chapter 31 and the first part of 32. Okay, this is God's camp. And when we enter into that next section, it says that Jacob sent messengers before him to his brother Esau to the land of Seir and the field of Edom. Okay? What's interesting there is when we touched on this briefly, that word, it says the angels of God met him. This is God's camp. Jacob is the one who initiates the contact with Esau. Jacob is the one that lets him know that, hey, I'm coming home. But what's interesting is the word that is used there, when he talks about in the previous sections about while Jacob left on his way, the angels of God met him. It's this word, malach. It's angels, a representative, an angel and such. And it's translated a messenger 98 times. It's translated angel 111 times. But then when you get to chapter 32, and it says that Jacob sent messengers before him to his brother Esau, guess what that word is? It's exactly the same word. It's exactly the same word that when Jacob comes into camp, God is essentially meeting him back on the borders of the promised land, of the land of his fathers. God's camp is meeting him there. And so then he sends, and he knows that because of the angels that he sees, the messengers that he sees. And then he's sending out messengers. Now, without knowing the language, without knowing the distinction, we would read that and say, okay, there's angels here, and there's messengers here. These are just some of his servants, the regular people. And what the implication is, because these statements are so close together, is that it's not just regular people. It may not be. Let me just put it like that. I'll put it as a little caveat. It may not be just ordinary servants and people that he is sending to his brother Esau. It may be some of these from the camp that's right there with him, that has welcomed him back. It may be that he is sending these kind of people to Esau. Now, now we know about angels. What can they do to their appearance?
Like men.
What's that?
Like men.
They can look like men, yes. Right? What else? What's that? Well, when you picture an angel in your mind, how do you normally picture them? Are they scrawny? Wimpy? Typically, no. Now, can they change their appearance and appear as something else? Yeah, I think they can. Hebrews talks about us. We have sometimes entertained angels and not been aware of it, and such as that. So I think they can alter what they look like. So they could have gone to Esau and appeared just normal, but I kind of wonder if they kind of went to Jacob or went to Esau with an appearance like a soldier, like somebody who is, I don't want to mess with this guy. Okay? They come and with this message, send these messengers to his brother Esau. He commanded them, saying, "This is what you should say to my lord, to Esau. This is what your servant Jacob said. I have been staying with Laban, and I have lingered there. I have lingered until now." Now I've come to possess oxen and donkeys, flocks, male servants and female servants. I sent word to tell my Lord in order to find favor in your eyes. So, what kind of message is this? Especially if you consider the nature of the person. You know, it's interesting that he might be giving commands to these angels, commands to these servants of God to go and speak on his behalf. And so if you imagine a guy with the soldier type, the one who looks very powerful and imposing, he's saying, you know, I've been staying away, but I'm coming home. I have lingered out there away from us, but now I am returning. You know, this is, what's that statement that, was it Patton or somebody made over in the Pacific? Who was it that made that big, what's that? It wasn't Patton. MacArthur, thank you. You know, where he sets foot back on the island and he says what? I have returned. All right? It's a very strong and forceful kind of a statement. And so he sends this out and he says, I have grown wealthy. I have grown, you know, maybe even powerful. I've been living with the benefits of the blessing that I received. You know, because he got that blessing from Isaac before he left. And he has experienced that blessing up there with God being with him and protecting him and prospering him. And so he has become wealthy and powerful, and I'm coming home. And Esau, given his personality, given his nature, given the kind of temperament he has, and considering his resentment toward Jacob, he interprets this he seems to interpret this aggressive. That Jacob is coming home, and Jacob is planning on taking over or something. He interprets it aggressively. So look at verse 7 in my scriptures, but he says, I've come, I've sent word to tell my Lord in order to find favor in your eyes. The messengers returned to Jacob saying, well, we went to your brother, to Esau, and he's also coming out to meet you. And 400 men with him. What kind of men do you think he's bringing? He's bringing fighting men with him. All right, he is bringing a force with him. He interprets this aggressively. You know, when Abraham, when he went off after Sodom and Gomorrah, he took 318 of his own people in chapter 14. Now he gathered some friends and rallied some other alliances with him along the way. But Abraham took only 313, and they won a victory, secured a victory. Where do you think Esau got these 500 fighting men?
400?
What's that?
400?
Where do you think he got these 400 fighting men? Because obviously he's got to be pretty powerful and influential to be able to call up 400 fighting men. As soon as Jacob's servant, messenger, shows up, Esau's on the move and he's got 400 people. Where do you think he got those? Well, it started with his marriages. Back in chapter 26, verse 34, when you see him he finds two women out there that are not of the family, not related to them. It says, when Esau was 40 years old, he took as wife Judith, the daughter of Beeri the Hittite, and Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. But they caused bitterness of spirit for Isaac and Rebekah. It started with them. These were daughters of powerful men, of leaders among their people. Princesses, in other words, kind of thing. They were ones that were of that ruling family. He is out there, Esau is out there making alliances. He is making connections and treaties and things with the people out there. And so he is building this kind of personality out there with these among the Canaanites. Now, over the 20 years that Jacob has been gone, what do you think he's been doing? He's building on those relationships. he's building on those alliances because he doesn't have the blessing. He doesn't have all of that abundance that's coming naturally to him. And so he's having to work a lot harder, and he's somebody who doesn't really know how to run the business anyway. He doesn't know how to take care of the sheep. He doesn't know how to take care of the flocks. He didn't stay at home long enough to learn that stuff from Abraham and from Isaac, his father. He doesn't know any of that. Or he doesn't know as much as Jacob, that's for sure. So over those 20 years, Esau has been building alliances. He's been building power. He's been living in Seir, which is one of those areas that controls one of the major trade routes through the area, the King's Highway. And so he's in Seir, which doesn't exactly have a whole lot of agriculture and a lot of places to grow things. It's not the best for having lots of flocks, so they are dependent upon supplies being brought to them. So he is essentially living in territories that he has conquered, territories that he has grown powerful in, which becomes Edom. And when you read his genealogy at the end of this portion, in chapter 36, you see that many chiefs and many leaders come from his line. And so they become a people that are continually opposed to Jacob and to the Israelites. So many of those leaders, while Jacob was up gaining these flocks and this prosperity, Esau was gathering armies. That's the kind of person that he was. He was dangerous. And when you think about this, here's Jacob coming home. He's been witnessing God all this time, taking care of him. And the first thing he does in coming back, this old nemesis rises again. Now, how many of y'all have ever had that or have memories of things? Was there a person that you were afraid of, like when you were in school or when you were younger, and you see them years later? Anybody ever run across somebody like that? That there was a person that was a bully or somebody that picked on you, and you didn't like them very much, they didn't like you, and 30, 40, 50 years later you bump into them. Now, what kind of response can you have? Sometimes you might feel just like you did the last time you saw them, right? You might be just as intimidated and threatened by them as you were then. But hopefully, the goal is that, maybe in those 30, 40 years that you've been not near that person, maybe you've grown up a little bit. Maybe you're not quite so much of a pushover or whatever else. Maybe that you are not going to be as threatened by them because you've grown in that time, right? I remember there was a girl, and I'm thinking back to like 3rd and 4th grade. She had a growth spurt at a very young age, and she was a good head and shoulders taller than everybody else. Recess, she was a terror at recess. She would, if you were playing a game with a ball and she wanted the ball, guess what happened? She took the ball. And there was nothing you could do to stop her. And if you tried to stand up to her, she would just beat on you. It was nasty. It was ugly. And so that was like 3rd and 4th grade. And then lost track of her. She went to a different school, something else. And I came back, to visit my friend. I moved away. I came back and visited my friends who were graduating. And guess who I ran into? I ran into her. No, well, she maxed out in the 4th grade as far as her growth. She was 5'2". She was a short girl. She had all of her growth early, and that was it. And so I looked and I was like, that was it? That was her? That's who I was so scared of? All the time at recess, I saw her coming and I would just drop it and run. Now, can you imagine, though, what it would have been like if I bumped into her and I was still scared of her? Would that be right? Would that be normal? Not really. I've grown a little bit since then. But here, what do we see? What kind of reaction do we see from Jacob? What kind of faith does he have? What has he learned in the past 20 years after all that he has seen of God's faithfulness? It's verse 8 in my translation. It says that Jacob, when he heard about this, he's come with these 400 men. So Jacob became extremely afraid and distressed. And he divided the people with him, along with the flocks and herds and camels, into 2 camps. For he thought, if Esau comes to one camp and strikes it, the camp that's left will escape. Okay? Why is he afraid? What's going on with him?
Still living in the past.
He's still living in that fear of Esau to a degree. Now he's heard he's coming with 400 men, and it's like, well, wait a minute. I wasn't saying I was coming looking for a fight, right? Which is apparently how Esau interpreted it. He wasn't coming looking for a fight, and that's how Esau was presenting himself. But why was he afraid? After all that God had told, God had told Laban back in chapter 31 that Laban in verse 24 says, God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream at night. This is as he's pursuing him. And he said to him, watch yourself, lest you say anything to Jacob, good or bad. And then down in verse 29, Laban says, you've behaved foolishly. It is in my power and in my hand to do evil with you. But yesterday the God of your father spoke to me, saying, watch yourself, lest you say anything to Jacob, good or bad. So Laban got a message from God when his intention was to come down and hurt Jacob. That was Laban's intention. He revealed something of himself there. Now, if you think about it, if God had done that for him with Laban, why wouldn't he do that with Esau? Or think about it like this, if God was with me, why did I ever have to run from Laban in the first place? If God is really watching out for me, if God is really protecting me, something about this, why is he afraid? He's seen God do this. He has this camp of the angels that are with him. Maybe he thought God's protection is going to be gone now that he was back in the land. Right? Maybe. I don't know. But sometimes that's how we are. We see God move in wonderful and powerful ways, and then as soon as something else comes up, it's like we revert back to what we were before we learned that lesson. Wasn't Elijah like that with Jezebel and such? He just wins this great victory against the prophets of Baal, and then she says 1 or 2 words, and he takes off for the hills. He's afraid of her after seeing such a great victory. So maybe he thought God's protection didn't count in the land. But he makes up this contingency plan. He divides into these 2 camps to hopefully that one of them will survive. And then he goes to God after that in verse 10. He does all these things. He calls upon God and all these things. He says, you remember, this was your idea. You told me to come home. You called me home. Then he says this. He says, I got to get back in the right chapter. He says, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, Adonai, who said to me, return to your land and to your relatives, and I will do good with you. Right? Remember, this was your idea. I am unworthy of all the proofs of mercy and of all the dependability that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed over this Jordan, and now I've become 2 camps. All right? He's showing some humility. He's saying, I'm not worthy of all that you've been doing for me. And so he requests that continued protection and deliverance. He says, deliver me, please, from my brother's hand, from Esau's hand, for I am afraid of him, that he'll come and strike me, the mothers with the children. You yourself said, so he's asking for that. And then he's reminding God of the promise. You yourself said, I will most certainly do good with you, and will make your seed like the sand of the sea that cannot be counted because of its abundance. So he's going to the right place. He's going to God. He's calling upon Him. He's reminding Him. He's doing what we should do, isn't he? I mean, he's demonstrating a good and a healthy relationship with God, that when something comes up, when something happens that seems too much for us, seems too powerful for us, he's going to the right place. And he's starting off with God's faithfulness. He's expressing his humility. He's expressing a repentant type of attitude. And he's calling upon and depending fully upon the power of God to be at work. It says then he stayed overnight there. And as he was sleeping, when he woke up, he had a new plan in the morning. Then from all that had come into his possession, he took an offering for his brother Esau. I don't have that yet. Let's see. He had this new idea. He made this offering to Esau. And when you look at that, it says he took from an offering for his brother Esau 200 female goats, 20 billy goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 milking camels with their young, 40 cows, 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, and 10 male donkeys. He put them in the hands of his servants, each herd by itself, and he said to his servants, "Pass over before me and put a gap between each of the herds." Then he commanded the first one, saying, "When my brother Esau meets you and asks you, saying, 'To whom do you belong and where are you going? To whom do all these before you belong?' Then you are to say, 'To your servant, to Jacob, it is an offering sent to my lord, to Esau. And look, he is also behind us.'" Okay? Now I kind of wonder about this. This is something that I honestly haven't found, and I haven't been able to look up yet. And so if anybody knows something on this, that's 560 animals that he's sending his way. And I'm kind of wondering if there's some significance about the size and the number of this kind of offering, of all of these different kind of flocks. I kind of wonder if there's some meaning in that. And so this is something to look up, because I kind of wonder if this could be the size of the inheritance, of the birthright that Esau would have received had he not sold it. That's kind of one of my spinning in my head. This is almost like a Esau, you're old enough now. Now it's time for you to take some responsibility. Here's a family starter kit of goats and sheep and flocks and herds and things like that, so you can get going and start making a life for yourself. This is the inheritance that you were to receive, so you can get started out on your own. Parents and families do that kind of stuff all the time. So I wonder if there's something significant about the amounts that he sent his way. But he's seeking to appease Esau. It's like, so if Esau is still holding a grudge, saying, "You took what was owed to me," and he's basically saying, "Here, this is what you would have received. You can have it." He's seeking to appease Esau and lower his anger. But there's something else here. It's also strategic. All right. How many men does Esau have with him? 400. How many men does it seems like he's giving each herd to one guy, giving and transporting it to Esau and say, "Here, this is yours. Take care of it." Now, Esau's got fighting men with him. Fighting men who may not know what to do with a flock of goats or a flock of sheep or some camels. What does he have to do? What does Esau have to do in order to receive all those flocks? Doesn't he have to assign some men to take care of it? So the first group of 200 shows up, and Esau has to assign 20 men to take care of that flock, because they don't know what they're doing. How many fighting men does he have left that are ready to go? 380. Then another flock of 200 things show up. He has to assign 20 more men to take care of them. Right? So strategically speaking, Jacob is dwindling down the active nature of his fighting force because they're having to take care of all these animals that he has just shoved right into his lap. Right? So that's pretty smart. On the other hand, he's also trying to show Esau honor. Right? He is calling him, these belong to my lord, but these now belong to my lord, to Esau. So he's attempting to show Esau honor. He's in holding on to that root of bitterness. Esau is the one who's convinced himself and probably everybody else that he's been wronged. But here comes the one who has wronged him, and he's giving him all of this offering of stuff. How would it look for Esau to reject the honor that's being offered to him? Would it look good? Or would he be dishonored if he was rejecting this offering that's made to him? Yeah, he would diminish. He would look bad if he did not accept and receive this offering to him. But then there's the other thing. For Esau to receive and accept this offering and still attack Jacob, how would he look then? You're a scumbag. If you were going to attack him, why did you ever accept his gifts? Right? So he's doing it on both ends. He's showing him honor and making him receive it. And then he's also would make him look bad for him to continue in his hostilities against Jacob. So what's going on here is brilliant tactics and such. Then verse 21, it says, you are to say, look, your servant Jacob is also behind us. For Jacob, he was thinking, let me appease him with the offering that goes ahead of me, and afterward see his face. Perhaps he will lift up my face. All right. Does anybody else have a different translation with that? It's verse 21 in mine. My numbering might be a little different. Anybody have anything else? I will see his face, okay. And he will accept me, yeah. The way this one reads, perhaps he'll lift up my face, because what does Jacob do when he meets Esau? Doesn't he bow down to the ground? For Esau to lift up his face is basically to welcome him back, to receive him, to accept him in peace. But what's interesting is that perhaps he'll lift up my face is exactly the same phrase that's in the blessing of the Aaronic blessing. The Lord, or Adonai, turn his face toward you, or lift up his countenance toward you, right? What does lift up his countenance toward you mean when we think about it in terms of the blessing? Welcome favorably. Look with favor upon him, right? Perhaps he will lift up his countenance toward me, right? It's the same exact phrasing, and I thought that was really interesting about what he's hoping for. This is Jacob's hope in reconciling with his brother. See, after 20 years of being gone, Jacob doesn't want it to be a fight anymore. He wants there to be that reconciliation. He wants there to be that relationship again without having to fear for his life. So then we get into chapter... Where are we at? We're in chapter 32. Then we get to verse 25 and such, where we get to this part where, he gets up that night, he took his wives, his servants, his 11 sons, he crosses over the ford of the Jabbok, he took them and sent them across the stream, and he sent across whatever he had. All right? Then comes this moment that is one of the more famous in here, and again, because we think we know the story, we get some of this wrong. Well, let's look at verse, I'm in 25. So Jacob remained all by himself. His family is across the river. I assume that he is on the same side as the river of Esau, so he's protected, or something. I've always heard mixed signals of which side of the river Jacob is on versus in relation to Esau. Some I've heard him say that he put all his family and all his stuff on the same side as Esau, and he's off by himself. And I've heard it the other. So, but he stays on the bank and he is by himself. Then it says, a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn, and when he saw that he had not overcome him, he struck the socket of his hip. So he dislocated the socket of Jacob's hip when he wrestled with him. Then he said, let me go, for the dawn has broken. Now this is a very interesting exchange, right? Y'all have heard this one before, right? The wrestling match and such. Jacob was by himself next to the river. Do you think he would have had a fire? Maybe to keep warm, right? Maybe not a huge one. You don't want to necessarily attract a whole lot of attention, but a fire big enough for himself. And you think of what comes off of a river at night that's in the air. Moisture, which turns into fog or a cloud, a vapor, things like that. So he's more than likely got a fire. There's this cloud that's coming up. What happens to your vision in the cloud and such like that? Does it get hindered a little bit? Yeah. Okay, so those are all interesting things. We get to that word where it says he wrestled, then a man. So Jacob is there by himself. There's probably a mist or a cloud coming up, and all of a sudden a guy shows up out of nowhere. How do you think, with his temperament, Jacob's temperament right now, do you think this is a good situation or a bad? It's probably not a good situation, you would think. Okay? And that's one reason why we translate this word as wrestle. It's the word avak, but it's only used in the context of Jacob. It's used twice, only in connection to Jacob. What's that? In this section. So there's no other verses to compare this word to in terms of translation. That's the best way to know, Scripture interpreting Scripture, right? So you can look and see how it's used somewhere else, and then that gives you a better idea of how this word can be understood. But we translate it typically as to wrestle or grapple, but it'll also say to get dusty or bedust. It comes from a primitive root word which means to float away as a vapor, like a mist in a lot of ways. So it comes from, this one's Hebrew number 79. It comes from this one, which is Hebrew word 80 in Strong's, to dust. It's dust or powder, and it's the same spelling, avak, but with a different vowel. But it's talking about dust on the ground or powder. Some seem in context is used as clouds, but like in Exodus chapter 9, it's a fine dust over the entire land of Egypt. That's talking about that. Isaiah chapter 5, it's their blossoms will blow away like the dust. Nahum says his path is in the whirlwind and storm, and clouds are the dust beneath his feet. Okay, so it has this very fine particulate concept. It's a very fine cloud or kicking up of dust. And you think about it, two guys are, what's that?
I want to say real quick that it's also just one letter away from Jabbok.
It's one letter away from the word Jabbok, which is the river.
So comparing it to the river is accurate.
Yeah. It's one letter away from the river Jabbok, which is on what shoreline he's on. But now, if you were wrestling on the banks of a river which was dry for most of the year, what would happen? What kind of ground are you standing on? Is it dirty, dusty? Right? So if you're wrestling on the ground with somebody, what's happening at your feet? You're kicking up a lot of stuff, right? So you're making, essentially, that's where the word kind of comes from. Hey, welcome, good to see you.
Hey,
How long have you been here?
just a few minutes. It took me a while.
Okay.
Gary has a stomach flu. He thought it would be gone, but it's
And-
lingered for
well,
several days.
It's good to see you.
Thank you. It's good to be here. It took
Yeah.
me a while. I honestly was almost here on time, but Gary got needy.
But, okay, so you'd be kicking up a cloud of dust if you're wrestling. So that's kind of where the idea of it being, you're in a wrestling match, you're moving around on this dusty ground, and that's where it's coming from. So, but wrestling implies, if you're wrestling with somebody, can you wrestle without contact? No, you're having to grab, you're pulling, you're doing all those things. There's some level of aggression, some level of, hostility or animosity and such. And so with no other usage cues, we don't really know whether this word is positive or negative based on the language. When we take it negatively, it makes it something like wrestle. It makes it something that this is a conflict. This is a fight of some. They're throwing each other around and they're kicking up this cloud of dust. But is there another context in that culture in which men around a fire would grab onto each other and make a cloud of dust? Can anybody think of anything else? Well, let me play this little clip here.
A single thread in a tapestry,
See
though
what
its
you
color
think.
brightly shine, can never see its
Y'all see
purpose
that?
in the pattern of the grand
This
design.
is a movie from the 90s, The Prince of Egypt.
And the stone that sits on the very top of the mountain's mighty face, does it think it's more important than the stones that form the base?
Not going to be the whole song.
So how can you see what your life is worth, or where your value lies? You can never see through the eyes of man. You must look at your life. Look at your life through heaven's eyes.
I don't know how.
That's something very real for that culture. When they come together at night, they do those kind of things. Then I've got another clip here. Watch carefully the ground around this. This is Fiddler on the Roof. This is the bottle dance at a wedding. But watch their feet. It might be hard to tell in this part here, but you'll see it really, really strong here in just a moment. But believe it or not, men don't always come together and fight. The second one from the right, watch his feet. See that? Okay. So there's something else. You can be doing exactly the same kind of description of things. Two men coming together, grappling and holding on to each other, kicking up a cloud of dust, and it's not a fight, but it's a celebration. What do you think they would have to celebrate? What's that?
He's home.
He's home. Right? He's home. This is a reunion of friends around the fire and they're happy to see each other. This is a didn't I tell you I was going to bring you back here kind of a moment. I mean, imagine this. Let's look at this picture here. Y'all see what that is? If you can read some of it, it's like a picture of a couple that is meeting at an airport. You know, when you haven't seen each other for a long time, what do? You grab onto each other, you hug each other, you spin around, you jump around. Now, can you imagine somebody interpreting it's like, man, they must really hate each other. They're beating each other up. They're wrestling together. Does that fit what you see? That's kind of the picture that we've done. We've taken something and made it a negative, made it something hostile, because that's how we know and understand Jacob. We think he's the deceiver. We think he's the trickster. We think he's the supplanter and all those things. And that is not how God sees him. That's not how God treats him at any step of the way. This is what he says in 28:15. He says, "Behold, I am with you, and I will watch over you wherever you go. And I will bring you back to this land, for I will not forsake you until I have done what I promised you." Right? This is a fulfillment of something he told him before he left. Chapter 28, verse 20, he says, Jacob makes his vow, and it's not really an if statement, it's a since statement, it's a because statement. "Since God will be with me and watch over me on this way that I'm going, and provide me food to eat and clothes to wear, and I return in peace, in shalom, to my father's house, then Adonai will be my God." He will have proved and demonstrated and shown everything that he is somebody I can take confidence in. He is somebody I can trust. He is somebody that he will fulfill that promise. This moment, this where he is alone and he comes across a man in the middle of the night, that's the fulfillment of that moment. This is the fulfillment of that promise. Because you think about it, if you're by yourself, you're afraid of being attacked, and you're wrestling with some unknown assailant, and it's an even match, so to speak, what's your goal? If you're literally wrestling with somebody, what's your goal? You're defending yourself against somebody who's there, which is what wrestling would be. You're defending yourself. Your goal is to drive them away, maybe, right? To disable them, to kill them, to hold on maybe until help comes, but that's at best, an impasse. And you aren't really in control, because the other guy, when you look at this, the other guy is more powerful than you. He saw that he did not overcome him. He didn't wear him out. He didn't tire him out. So the man struck the socket of Jacob's hip, so that he dislocated that socket. Okay? So all of that's going on, but you're not really trying to hurt him. You're not trying to hurt this guy that you're wrestling with who just dislocated your hip. You're not trying to get away from him. You're not trying to get him away from you. In fact, you're holding on to him even more. You're grabbing onto him and keeping hold of him. I mean, if this is hostility, if this is a fighting match, would you really want to seek a blessing from that person? Hey, I know we're fighting and everything, but would you bless me? There's a lot of things in this scenario that don't make sense with it being a conflict. This is much more of a friendship, a good thing that's happening here. This is not combative or antagonistic. This is more of a celebration. And this kind of clinging to him, this man that he is wrestling with, this clinging to him is a lot more like what you see out of Miriam or Mary in John chapter 20. This is after the resurrection. She turns around, she sees Yeshua standing there. She didn't know that it was Yeshua. So Yeshua says to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Who are you looking for?" And thinking he was the gardener, she says to him, "Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you've put him, so I will take him away." And Yeshua says to her, Miriam, turning around, she says to him in Aramaic, Rabboni, which means teacher. Yeshua says to her, what? "Stop wrestling with me." Is that it? Is she wrestling with him at that moment? No. She's grabbing him, she's holding on to him, clinging to him, and she doesn't want to let go because that's her Lord. He said, "Stop clinging to me, for I have not yet gone up to the Father." Right? This is that kind of moment. He is clinging, and who is Jacob really wrestling with anyway? Isn't he wrestling with Yeshua in the flesh there for him, this moment? Yes. Okay? That's the kind of clinging that's going on. Jacob, what's that?
Well, when I read this story before, I always looked at it as spiritual warfare. And Jacob was having his sort of wavering, but yet he was holding on.
Mm-hmm.
And we go through times that we don't know who we're wrestling with.
That's true.
And we hold on to the hopes and the promises that we have, even though it looks like they're being taken.
Well, we see he's nervous and he's afraid before this encounter.
Yeah.
But he's not nervous and afraid after this encounter.
Yeah, that's the way it is in spiritual warfare.
And so then that's because of who this is and what's going on. See, Jacob doesn't want this night to end. Jacob doesn't want to let go of the one he has been with him all along. It's like a dance that they're doing together. And Jacob knows who is the greater. You know, it says that the man was not able to overcome him. Really? You know, it's not a matter of power at this point. But does Jacob know which one of them is the greater? Yes. I mean, the man was able to dislocate his hip, if that was any indication. But and I know that Jacob understands that the one he is wrestling with is greater than him because of what it says in the next passage. He says, "I won't let go unless you bless me." Okay? Hebrews chapter 7, verse 7 says this, "Now it is beyond dispute that the lesser is blessed by the greater." All right? The lesser is blessed by the greater. If Jacob thought he was greater than the one he was wrestling with, he would expect that person to seek his favor. But Jacob immediately begins to seek the favor of the one he is wrestling with. So Jacob knows who he's dealing with. Jacob knows who he is celebrating with and dancing with, because he asks for a blessing. Then he said to him, "What is your name?" And he says, "Jacob," he says. And then he said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob." See, what's the name Jacob? It's a name that was given to him in terms of what? How did he get the name Jacob? How did he get the name Jacob? What's it mean?
Heel grabber.
Heel grabber, holding on, or he was holding on to his brother, his heel. And of course there's various ways that people have looked at what that means. Is he restraining him? He's defending himself from his brother and all those other kinds of concepts. But he gets his name in relation to his brother. His name itself is always connected to somebody else. Right? So he is defined as a person, and we, as people interpreting the scriptures, define him in relation to Esau and his relationship with Esau, using even Esau's words. All right? He says, "You will no longer be defined by Esau." Esau is no longer going to be the one who's the master of your story. He's not going to be the one who has the authority over your life. He is not going to be the one that is in control of you and who you are. Right? How many of y'all have ever felt that kind of pressure that, like if you know somebody has a famous parent, maybe they're of a company, or they're a congresswoman, a congressman, some political figure, and their children are always understood as, oh, you're Senator Grassley's son. Wow. They're always connected with somebody else. Husbands and wives, you don't have your own name. You're always, oh, you're Vicky's husband, right? Things like that. Yeah. Nobody knows what I'm talking about, right? But we are named, and our name is associated with somebody else. And it's like your name, you, Jacob, are no longer going to be defined by your relationship with Esau, but by him. So your name will no longer be named Jacob, but rather Israel. Okay? Israel. And Israel, this one here, it sounds like, that's what a lot of your notations will say, it sounds like one who struggles with God. And that's how we interpret it. That's how we take it. What does Israel mean? Oh, it means one who struggles with God. But most of the notations will say it doesn't say that. It sounds like that. But that's not what it means. When you look it up in the Strongs and such, it means that God prevails, or he will rule as God. Those are some of the things that come up over there. It comes from this Hebrew 820 or 8280, which Sarah, which means to contend or have power, as like a prince. Right? You look at Sarah's name. She means my princess. Sarai means my princess. Sarah means like princess of Yahweh. All right. In the masculine form, it's Sar. It means prince. That's the root of the word Yisrael. It's this Sar. So he's having power as a prince. He said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but rather Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have overcome. But read it. This is the King James. This is how it translates it. Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel, for as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and prevail. Guess which one is the more accurate? Or because we think we know Jacob's story, we think, well, that's got to be right, because he's really fighting with God. No, he's not fighting with as in against God. He is fighting everybody else with God. God is with him, has been with him all along. He's not fighting God. God is fighting with him. And he has overcome all these other men. As a prince, you have power with God, and you have prevailed. So he is nervous before he has this conversation, before his identity, his name is redefined. But when he comes out of this conversation, he is a totally changed person. It says the son, well, let's see, he says, then that Jacob asked, please tell me your name. But the man said to him, what's this? You're asking me my name. Then he blessed him. Does Jacob know who he is? Yes. But he wants to hear that spoken word, that spoken name over him, because there is a blessing in hearing the name. So Jacob, let's see, he said, what? He blessed him there. Jacob named the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life has been spared. And now the sun rose upon him just as he crossed by Peniel, limping because of his hip. And that's why the children of Israel do not eat the tendon of the hip socket to this very day, because he struck the socket of Jacob's thigh on the tendon of his hip. Chapter 33, then Jacob glanced up and saw, behold, there was Esau coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel, the two female servants. He put the female servants and their children first, then Leah and her children behind them, and Rachel and Joseph behind them. But he himself passed on ahead of them and bowed to the ground 7 times until he came near his brother. So who's out in front? Jacob is. If he was a coward, where would he be? He'd let all of them be in front, right? He is meeting that 400 men with him at the front, right? Whatever fear or whatever he had beforehand, it's gone. And there's a whole lot of things that happen in that conversation but when you look at that passage that we looked at earlier in Hosea, it says he took his brother by the heel in the womb, right? That's Jacob. That's his name. By his strength he had power with God, yea, he had power over the angel and prevailed. He wept and made supplication. This is like the language of by naming him Prince of God is another way of translating it. This is like a coronation kind of a moment for Jacob. God is treating him like a prince. Like, I am setting you up as you're going to be my representative. You are going to be the one that's ruling, representing me in my ways, because Esau was immoral and he was godless, right? So can he really represent God and represent his ways? No. Jacob can't. Because, as it said in the beginning, he's not a quiet man, he's a blameless man. And that's not the way we understand him. Let me get into here. It says Jacob, this is really interesting. It says that on that day Esau returned on his way to Seir, but Jacob journeyed to Sukkot and built a house for himself and for his livestock and made booths. That's the reason that place is called Sukkot, right? I'm kind of wondering, is actually at the time of Sukkot that all of this is happening. Because you go back, this is just a kind of an extra thing for you. Go back to chapter 31, when Jacob leaves and takes, gets away from Laban. I kind of think, I'm wondering if this is one of those moments. I wonder if this is happening, that he leaves on the Feast of Trumpets, or the Day of Trumpets. Okay? Because notice what happens. Look at, mine is verse 22. It says, when Laban was told about his leaving, in that section, Laban was told on the 3rd day after Jacob fled, he took his relatives with him and pursued him a 7 days' journey. Then he overtook him at the hill country of Gilead. What number is that? He heard about it 3 days later. It takes 7 days to catch up with him. How many days is that? 10 days. What's the significance of 10 days after the Feast of Trumpets? Well, it's 10 days from the Feast of Trumpets to the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. And where is he on 10 days after that? He's right on the border of the land. And they have an offering. They make a covenant together there. Laban and Jacob does. But there's also, that Jacob makes an oath by the fear of his father Isaac, and he makes a sacrifice on the mountain. I kind of wonder if that's all happening on the Day of Atonement. And then a few days later, Esau is coming after him with 400 men. And that whole sequence ends with him going to Sukkot. So, since it specifically mentions the 10 days, that's kind of where it pieces together in there for me a little bit. But, so that's all I have. Does anybody else have any thoughts or questions or something else?